A small hand seized Caleb Turner's stirrup as festival drums thumped through dusty spring air. Leather creaked hard beneath the grip, stopping horse and rider before the crowded street. Caleb looked down. A young Apache woman, Lela Nantan, held the bridle with quiet iron strength. Her dark eyes never left the bay stallion's scarred shoulder. "Where did you steal that horse, ranch hand?" The stallion stamped once. Old war brands burned beneath fresh saddle marks, the mark of Chief Thomas Nantan. And the music of the festival suddenly sounded like distant drums of war. Festival drums rolled across the spring dust. Deep. Steady. Boom. 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 Caleb Turner's stallion halted mid-step when a hand seized the leather stirrup. Hard. Small fingers. Iron grip. The horse snorted and stamped once against the packed street, iron shoe ringing sharp against stone. Caleb looked down slowly. A young Apache woman stood beside the bay stallion, her hand still locked around the bridle strap. Lela Nantan. Dark braid over one shoulder. Eyes fixed on the scar burned deep into the stallion's shoulder. The old war brand. The horse shifted again. Leather creaked. The reins pulled tight between them. "You ride stolen blood," she said quietly. The drums kept pounding behind them. Boom. 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 Festival flags snapped in the warm wind above the street. Children laughed somewhere near the pie tents. But the laughter faded when people saw the brand. A circle. Broken spear through the center. Apache war mark. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Men leaned closer. Boot heels scraped dust. "That horse ain't yours, boy," someone muttered. Caleb said nothing. He had found the stallion 3 weeks earlier wandering the open range. Half-starved. Ribs showing. No saddle. No rider. Just the brand burned into its shoulder and miles of empty prairie behind it. Now the woman's grip tightened. "You found him," Lela said. "Or you took him." The stallion tossed its head. Bit clanked against teeth. Caleb finally spoke. "Horse walked into my camp." A pause. Wind brushed through the festival banners. The drum slowed. Boom. Pause. Boom. Lela steadied his face. Long. Careful. Then her fingers loosened on the bridle. But she did not step away. "That horse carried my brother," she said. Her voice stayed calm. Too calm. "Last winter." A silence spread through the street. Boot leather shifted. A wagon axle squealed somewhere behind them. Caleb felt the weight of every eye in town pressing against his back. He swung down from the saddle. Spurs clinked softly as his boots touched dust. Up close he could see the exhaustion in her face. Wind-burned skin. Travel dust along her sleeves. Days on the road. Maybe weeks. "Brother dead?" Caleb asked. "I do not know." The stallion breathed hard beside them. Warm air fogging the cool morning. Boom. 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 The festival drums started again. Louder now. But the sound felt wrong. Like distant war drums echoing through canyon walls. Caleb looked once more at the brand. Then at the woman standing alone in a town that would never welcome her. He gathered the reins. "You can follow if you want answers." He mounted again. The stallion turned down the open road beyond the festival tents. Hooves thudded against dirt. Slow. Steady. Behind him he heard another set of footsteps in the dust. Soft. Determined. Miles later the ranch house came into view beyond the dry pasture. Lonely. Silent. The wind pushed through the empty porch rails with a hollow wooden groan. Caleb dismounted. Boots thudding against dry ground. He opened the door. The hinges rasped long and low. Inside, the house smelled of cold ashes and old wood. He stepped aside. The floorboards creaked beneath the woman's cautious steps as Lela Nantan entered the home. The door closed behind Lela with a dull wooden thud. Silence followed. The ranch house held the kind of silence that settles into empty rooms and stays there for years. Cold air moved through the cracks in the boards. It brushed the back of Caleb Turner's neck as he crossed the room. Boot heels thudded once. Twice. The floor answered with a tired creak. Caleb set his hat on the table. Dust lifted from the brim and floated through the weak afternoon light. Lela stood near the door. Still. Watching. The house smelled of old wood. Cold ashes. Lonely winters. Outside, the stallion snorted beside the hitch rail. Leather shifted. A hoof scraped dirt. Caleb glanced toward the small iron stove. Black. Dead. He crouched beside it and pushed the door open. Ash slid softly across the grate. Gray. Cold. Wood's in the shed, he said. His voice sounded rough in the quiet room. Lela did not move at first. Then her steps crossed the boards. Soft. Careful. The door opened again. Wind rushed in. Cold and sharp. A moment later the door closed. Silence returned. Caleb worked the stove with slow hands. Dry twigs first. Then thicker pieces. Steel struck flint. Once. Twice. The spark caught. A small flame crawled across the wood. Crackle. Pop. Warmth slowly pushed into the room. Lela returned carrying a bundle of split logs in both arms. She dropped them beside the stove. Wood knocked together with the hollow clack. You live alone, she said. Caleb nodded. Most days. The fire strengthened. Orange light flickered against the walls. Cold shadows retreated into the corners of the house. Outside, the stallion stamped again. A sharp metal ring as the horseshoe struck the rail. Lela's eyes lifted. That horse remembers something, she said. Caleb pushed another log into the fire. It remembers hunger. Flames climbed higher. The room slowly warmed. Lela moved to the small table. Her fingers brushed the surface. Dust gathered against her skin. No woman here long time. No. A pause settled. Quiet again. But warmer now. Caleb poured water into a small kettle and set it above the fire. Metal clicked softly against iron. The stallion shifted outside. Leather creaked. Wind brushed across the open land. Lela stepped toward the window. Through the glass she watched the horse standing alone in the fading light. The scarred brand showed clearly against its stark coat. Her eyes hardened. That mark, she said quietly. My father burned it. Caleb said nothing. The kettle began to whisper. Soft steam rising. Warmth filled the room. For a moment the ranch house almost felt alive again. Almost. Then a distant sound carried across the valley, faint. Metal striking metal. Caleb's head turned toward the door. The sound came again. Clink. Clink. Horse tack. Far away. Riders moving somewhere across the plains. Lela heard it too. Her shoulders stiffened. Your neighbors? Caleb shook his head. Nearest ranch is 20 miles west. The sound faded. Wind swallowed it. But the quiet that followed felt different. Thinner. More watchful. Caleb poured hot water into 2 tin cups. Steam curled upward between them. He slid 1 cup across the table. Lela wrapped her hands around it. Warmth soaked slowly into her fingers. She closed her eyes for a moment. Long breath. The fire popped loudly. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Wood creaked beneath his weight. You've followed me a long way, he said. Yes. For a horse. For my brother. Silence again. The cattle hissed softly. Outside, dusk lowered over the pasture. Wind pushed through dry grass. Whispering. Caleb stood. He grabbed his coat from the peg. Come. They stepped onto the porch. The cold struck immediately. Sharp. Honest. The stallion lifted its head. Ears forward. Its breath fogged the darkening air. Lela approached slowly. The horse shifted but did not pull away. Her hand rose. Fingers brushing the scarred brand. The stallion breathed out slowly. Warm breath against her sleeve. "He carried Thomas," she whispered. "My brother rode him when the soldiers came." Caleb leaned against the rail. Listening. Wind moved through the empty pasture. The boards beneath them creaked softly. "What happened?" he asked. Lela kept her hand on the horse. Smoke. Gunfire. Men shouting. Her voice stayed steady. But her fingers tightened slightly. When the fire died, the horse was gone. The stallion lowered its head. Quiet. As if it remembered. Darkness thickened across the valley. Far off, a single coyote cried. Long. Lonely. Caleb pushed away from the rail. "You can sleep in the loft tonight." He gestured toward the barn. Warmer than the ground. Lela studied him. Searching. "You trust me and your barn?" "I trust the horse." They walked toward the barn together. Boots pressing into the dirt. Slow. Even. The barn door groaned open. Old hinges complaining in the cold night. Inside, dry hay rustled. The stallion stepped into its stall. Hooves thudding softly on packed earth. Caleb lit a lantern. Yellow light spread across the beams. Warm. Gentle. Dust floated through the glow. He set a blanket near the loft ladder. "You rest," he said. "I'll check the pasture." Lela climbed the ladder slowly. Wood creaked beneath each step. She reached the loft and settled into the hay. Below, Caleb stepped back outside. Cold wind hit his face. He listened. The valley looked empty. Quiet. But somewhere far across the dark plains came the faint echo again. Clink. Clink. Horseback moving through the night. Dawn slid pale and cold across the valley. Frost clung to the pasture grass. Thin. Sharp. Caleb Turner pushed open the barn door. The hinges groaned long and low. Inside, the stallion shifted in its stall. Hoof against packed dirt. Thud. Breath fogged the dim air. Warm. Alive. Caleb stepped inside. His boots stirred the straw with a dry whisper. He checked the horse first. Always the horse first. The stallion watched him. Ears forward. Quiet. Outside the barn loft, hay rustled softly. A small movement above. Lela Nantan leaned over the loft rail. Dark hair loose from the braid. Morning light caught her face. "You rise early," she said. Caleb poured grain into the trough. "Horse does." The stallion lowered its head. Grain rattled against wood. Crunch. Crunch. The sound filled the barn. Warm breath. Animal heat. Lela climbed down the ladder slowly. Each rung creaked under her weight. Cold morning air slipped through the barn boards. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Caleb handed her a tin cup. Coffee. Steam rising. She took it without a word. Hand circling the warmth. Outside, the wind moved through the pasture. Low. Restless. They stepped out of the barn together. The sky held the soft gray of early spring. Snow still clung to the far ridges. Cold above. Mud below. The ranch house waited silent across the yard. Smoke drifted thin from the chimney. The fire still alive inside. Lela walked toward the fence. Her fingers brushed the top rail. Frost melted beneath her touch. "You live quiet," she said. "Quiet keeps trouble far away." She gave a faint smile. "Trouble rode here yesterday." Caleb did not answer. A hammer rang suddenly from the far pasture. Clang. Metal against metal. Lela's head lifted. "What is that?" Loose fence wire. He grabbed his coat. Storm pulled it down last week. They walked the pasture together. Boots pressing into wet earth. Mud clung heavy to their steps. A crow called somewhere beyond the cottonwoods. Harsh. Lonely. The broken fence sagged against the wind. Barbed wire rattled softly. Clink. Clink. Caleb worked the post back into place. Wood thudded against the ground. He wrapped the wire tight. Hands steady. Silent work. Lela watched the stallion grazing nearby. The horse moved slowly through the grass. But every few steps it lifted its head. Listening. Always listening. Your horse hears things, she said. Every horse does. No. Her voice stayed quiet. This one remembers. Caleb twisted the final strand of wire. Metal scraped sharply. He looked toward the stallion. The horse stared toward the distant ridge. Still. Frozen. Then it snorted once and returned to grazing. Wind swept across the open land. Cold again. Sharp again. They returned to the ranch house by midday. The fire inside had burned low. Gray ash. Dull heat. Caleb knelt beside the stove. Wood knocked together as he fed the flame. Crackle. Pop. Warmth pushed slowly through the room. Lela filled a small basin with water. She wiped dust from the table. From the window ledge. From the chair backs. Each movement quiet. Careful. The house began to breathe again. Not loud. But alive. Outside, the stallion stamped suddenly. Hard. The sound rang against the boards. Caleb froze. Listening. Lela looked toward the door. The horse snorted again. Uneasy. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Wind rolled across the valley. Grass bending low. The horizon stretched wide and empty. But a thin line of dust moved far off along the ridge. Too distant to see riders. But the dust drifted slowly. Like something traveling. Caleb watched until the wind swallowed the trail. Then he stepped back inside. The plains move strange this time of year, he said. Lela steadied his face. You heard riders last night? He said nothing. The fire popped again. Warm light flickered against the walls. Afternoon slipped quietly toward evening. They ate simple stew from the same iron pot. Spoons scraping softly. The sound filled the room. Lela sat near the fire. Hands extended toward the heat. The cold from the morning slowly left her bones. Caleb sat across the table. Silent. Watching the flames. You lost someone here, she said. Not a question. A knowing. Caleb's spoon stopped. Wood creaked as he leaned back. My wife. A pause. Winter fever. Lela lowered her eyes. The fire cracked softly. Outside, the wind quieted. The ranch settled into evening stillness. For the first time since she arrived, Lela spoke gently. This house was lonely. It still is. Not tonight. The fire burned stronger now. Warm light filled the room. Outside, the stallion shifted again. Hoofs striking wood. Clack. Caleb stood. He opened the door. The night air rushed in. Cold. The horse stood rigid beside the fence. Head high. Ears forward. Listening. Far beyond the valley, a faint metallic echo carried through the dark. Clink. Clink. Horse tack. Slow. Steady. Riders moving somewhere out on the plains. Caleb closed the door quietly. The latch clicked. Inside, the fire crackled. Warm. But the sound of distant metal still lingered in his ears. Morning came warmer. Not warm enough for comfort. But warmer than the frozen dawns that usually ruled the valley. Sunlight slid through the window boards. Gold dust drifting in the quiet air. Caleb Turner woke to a sound he had not heard in months. Metal against iron. Soft. Steady. Clink. Clink. He sat up slowly. Boots scraped the floor as his feet touched wood. The sound came again. Clink. Clink. He stepped into the kitchen. Lela Nantan stood beside the stove, tin pan in hand. She stirred beans slowly over the small flame. Steam lifted toward the rafters. Warm. Alive. The house smelled different. Food. Smoke. Something close to comfort. "You move quiet," Caleb said. She did not turn. "You sleep heavy." The fire cracked softly beneath the pan. Caleb pulled on his coat. Cold air crept through the boards. But the stove pushed warmth into the room. Slow. Gentle. Lela set the pan down. Spoons knocked lightly against tin bowls. Clink. Clink. They ate without hurry. The quiet felt different now. Not empty. Just quiet. Outside, the stallion whinnied softly. Caleb stepped onto the porch. The sun warmed the pasture. Thin green shoots pushing through winter soil. Spring trying to wake. The stallion stood near the fence. Head low. Grazing. But every few seconds the horse lifted its head. Listening. Caleb watched the distant ridge. The plains looked empty. Endless. Wind rolled through the grass. Low. Restless. Behind him, the door creaked open. Lela stepped onto the porch. She followed his gaze. "You watch the ridge every morning?" Caleb nodded. "Habit. From soldiers? From men?" She said nothing. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke. Not their fire. Something far away. Lela noticed it too. Her nose lifted slightly. "Someone camps west of here." Caleb's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Maybe." The stallion stamped suddenly. Hoof striking hard wood. Clack. Both of them turned. The horse stood stiff now. Head high. Ears locked toward the distant plains. Wind brushed across its mane. The animal snorted once. Sharp. Uneasy. Caleb walked toward the fence. His boots pressed deep into the damp earth. The stallion calmed when he reached the rail. But the horse kept watching the same direction. West. Lela stood beside him. "That horse sees something you do not." "Maybe." The wind died slowly. The pasture fell quiet again. Too quiet. Caleb turned back toward the barn. Work won't wait. They spent the morning mending the barn roof. Ladder scraping the wood siding. Boards knocking together. Hammer strikes echoing across the valley. Bang. 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 Noise broke the long silence of the ranch. Dust shook loose from the rafters. Lela held the boards steady while Caleb nailed them into place. "You swing that hammer like a soldier," she said. "I swung worse things." She did not ask. The hammer fell again. Bang. A crow screamed overhead. The stallion answered with a restless whinny. Caleb climbed down from the ladder. He wiped sweat from his neck. The sun climbed higher now. Warm against the barn wall. Spring breathing slowly into the valley. For a moment the ranch felt almost peaceful. Almost safe. Then a distant sound rolled faint across the plains. Not metal. Not wind. Hooves. Very far away. But many. Caleb froze. Lela listened. The sound faded quickly. Too distant to follow. But the silence afterward felt thinner. Like ice cracking beneath water. "Riders," she said. "Maybe cattle." "You do not believe that?" "No." The stallion pawed the ground again. Restless. Dust lifted around its hooves. The horse knew. Animals always knew first. They returned to the house near dusk. The fire burned strong again. orange light pushing back the evening chill. Lela stirred stew while Caleb repaired a broken chair leg. Wood rasped beneath his knife. Shavings curled onto the floor. The room held warmth now. Noise. Life. Outside, the wind softened. Spring insects hummed faintly in the grass. Lela placed 2 bowls on the table. Steam rose between them. "Your house changes," she said. Caleb looked around slowly. The table clean. The window wiped clear. The stove burning steady. "It remembers people," she said. Caleb ran a hand across the chair back. "My wife used to say that." Silence settled gently between them. But it was not the cold silence from before. This silence held warmth. The stallion suddenly struck the fence outside. Hard. Clack. Caleb stood instantly. The door opened with a sharp creak. Cold evening air rushed in. The horse stood rigid beside the rail. Head high. Ears forward. Listening. Far across the fading plains, a faint glimmer of lantern light flickered along the ridge. One. Then another. Tiny sparks against the darkening horizon. Moving slowly. Riding closer. Caleb watched the lights. His jaw tightened. Behind him the warm fire crackled inside the house. But the valley had begun to wake with other sounds. And those riders were not turning away. The sun climbed higher now. Warm against the barn wall. Spring breathing slowly into the valley. For a moment the ranch felt almost peaceful. Almost safe. Then a distant sound rolled faint across the plains. Not metal. Not wind. Hooves. Very far away. But many. Caleb froze. Lela listened. The sound faded quickly. Too distant to follow. But the silence afterward felt thinner. Like ice cracking beneath water. "Riders," she said. "Maybe cattle." "You do not believe that?" "No." The stallion pawed the ground again. Restless. Dust lifted around its hooves. The horse knew. Animals always knew first. They returned to the house near dusk. The fire burned strong again. Orange light pushing back the evening chill. Lela stirred stew while Caleb repaired a broken chair leg. Wood rasped beneath his knife. Shavings curled onto the floor. The room held warmth now. Noise. Life. Outside, the wind softened. Spring insects hummed faintly in the grass. Lela placed 2 bowls on the table. Steam rose between them. "Your house changes," she said. Caleb looked around slowly. The table clean. The window wiped clear. The stove burning steady. "It remembers people," she said. Caleb ran a hand across the chair back. "My wife used to say that." Silence settled gently between them. But it was not the cold silence from before. This silence held warmth. The stallion suddenly struck the fence outside. Hard. Clack. Caleb stood instantly. The door opened with a sharp creak. Cold evening air rushed in. The horse stood rigid beside the rail. Head high. Ears forward. Listening. Far across the fading plains, a faint glimmer of lantern light flickered along the ridge. One. Then another. Tiny sparks against the darkening horizon. Moving slowly. Riding closer. Caleb watched the lights. His jaw tightened. Behind him the warm fire crackled inside the house. But the valley had begun to wake with other sounds. And those riders were not turning away. Not fast. Not threatening. Just deliberate. He pulled out a folded paper. The parchment snapped softly in the wind. "Bill of claim," he said. "My brand inspector signed it." He held it up between 2 fingers. The paper rustled. Cold breeze tugging the corners. Caleb did not take it. Hale studied him a moment longer. Then he leaned forward slightly in the saddle. "Look around you, Turner." His hand gestured toward the valley. Miles of open land. Grass bending in the wind. This whole basin belongs to me now. The riders behind him shifted again. Metal clinked. Horse breath rolled heavy in the cold air. Hale's voice softened. But I'm a reasonable man. He nodded toward the stallion. Sell me the horse. Take the money. You keep your little ranch. Silence stretched across the yard. The fire inside the house popped faintly through the open window. Warmth behind them. Cold men in front. Lela spoke first. No. Hale's eyes slid toward her. Calm. Almost amused. You're not part of this discussion. I am the reason for it. The wind gusted suddenly. Dust lifted across the pasture. The stallion jerked its head. Hooves pounding the dirt once. Twice. Hale's smile faded a little. Careful, he said softly. People disappear out here. His riders laughed again. Low. Short. Caleb stepped closer to the fence. Close enough now that he could see the thin scar along Hale's jaw. Old violence. Well, Caleb said quietly. Looks like he rode all this way for nothing. Hale studied him a long moment. Wind rattled the fence wire between them. A distant crow screamed above the valley. Then Hale folded the paper slowly. The parchment crackled. He tucked it back into his coat. No, he said. I rode out here to introduce myself. His horse turned slightly. Leather creaking. The riders followed his movement. Dust shifting beneath their hooves. Hale looked once more at the stallion. Then at Lela. His voice dropped low. I'll come back for what's mine. He tipped his hat again. A polite gesture. Almost friendly. Then he turned his horse. The riders followed him across the pasture. Hooves thudding slowly through the grass. The sound faded toward the ridge. Clink. Clink. Metal against saddle. The stallion watched them go. Rigid. Breathing hard. Caleb stood beside the fence until the dust settled. Behind him, the house fire cracked softly. Warm. But the valley felt colder now. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Victor Hale was already planning his return. The dust from Victor Hale's riders faded slowly across the valley. Wind carried the last thin ribbon toward the western ridge. Then the land fell quiet again. Too quiet. Caleb Turner stood at the fence long after the riders disappeared. The stallion shifted beside him. Hoof striking dirt. Clack. Clack. The horse kept staring toward the ridge. Ears forward. Waiting. Lela Nantan stood near the porch steps. Her arms folded against the cold morning wind. They will return, she said. Caleb nodded once. Men like Hale always do. He turned toward the house. Boots grinding gravel. The porch boards creaked under his weight. Inside, the stove still held a small bed of glowing coals. Warm. Orange. He fed the fire with 2 fresh logs. Wood cracked. Flames climbed again. Lela entered behind him. The door shut with a low thud. Cold wind stayed outside. But the tension rode in with them. Caleb set a kettle above the flame. Metal touched iron. Clink. For a moment neither spoke. The fire whispered. Water slowly warmed. Lela rested her hands near the heat. Her fingers trembled slightly. Not from fear. From memory. Hale's men burned our winter camp, she said quietly. Caleb looked up. The kettle began to murmur. Soft steam curling upward. They came before sunrise, she continued. Gunshots first. Her voice stayed calm. Steady. But the words carried weight. My brother Thomas rode that horse when the soldiers chased us into the hills. Caleb's eyes drifted toward the window. The stallion grazed near the fence. Head low. Quiet. After the smoke cleared, Lela said, the herd was gone. She turned toward Caleb. and the riders wore the same black coats. The kettle rattled softly. Caleb lifted it from the flame. He poured hot water into 2 cups. Steam filled the small room. Warm breath against cold thoughts. Outside, a crow screamed. Sharp. The stallion lifted its head again. Watching the ridge, Caleb carried the cups to the table. The wood creaked as he sat. "You're saying Hale stole the herd?" "I know he did." Silence returned. Heavy now. The kind that sits between people when truth lands. Then a distant sound rolled faint across the valley. Not wind. Not birds. Hooves. Far away. But many. Caleb's head lifted. The stallion stamped once. Clack. The sound faded quickly. Too distant to track, but close enough to stir the air. Lela listened carefully. They watched this place now. Caleb stood. His chair scraped the floor. He walked to the door and stepped outside. Cold air wrapped around him. The valley stretched wide and open beneath the pale sky. Nothing moved. Grass bending softly in the wind. No riders. No dust. But the silence felt thinner. Like someone breathing just beyond the hills. He returned inside. "They're scouting." Lela nodded. "Waiting for night." Caleb reached for his coat. "Not tonight." He walked toward the barn. The stallion whinnied softly when he approached. The horse's eyes rolled wide in the sunlight. Nervous. Caleb checked the saddle straps. Tight. Then he ran a hand along the scarred brand. The horse shivered slightly. Lela appeared at the barn doorway. "You plan to leave?" "Just riding the boundary." She stepped closer. Her hand rested briefly on the stallion's neck. "You ride alone?" Caleb tightened the girth strap. "Always have." The saddle leather groaned softly. Wind pushed through the open barn doors. Cold again. Sharp again. "You do not have to be alone now," Lela said quietly. Caleb paused. Just for a moment. Then he mounted the stallion. Hooves struck dirt as the horse stepped from the barn. They rode slowly along the fence line. The valley looked peaceful under the afternoon sun. But signs of watchers lingered. Fresh hoof prints near the creek. A broken branch along the trail. Small things. Quiet warnings. Caleb returned near dusk. The sky burned orange across the western hills. The ranch house glowed with firelight. Warm. Inviting. Lela stood on the porch. She had lit a lantern. Yellow light flickered against the boards. The stallion stopped beneath the rail. Caleb dismounted. Boots thudding the ground. "You were right," he said. "They're out there." Lela nodded. "I know they're kind." Inside, the fire burned stronger now. The room held warmth. Stew simmered slowly in the pot. Soft bubbling sounds. Life returning to the house. They ate quietly. Spoons scraping against tin bowls. Outside, night settled across the valley. Wind faded. Insects hummed softly in the grass. Peaceful sounds. Almost comforting. Then the stallion slammed its hoof against the fence. Hard. Clack. Caleb froze. Lela lifted her head. Another sound carried through the darkness. Faint. Metal against leather. Clink. Clink. Horseback moving slowly across the plains. Closer now. Watching the ranch from somewhere beyond the hills. Caleb stood and closed the door firmly. The latch snapped shut. Inside, the fire crackled warm and steady. But the night outside had begun to move. Night pressed hard against the ranch. Cold. Heavy. The fire inside Caleb Turner's house burned low and steady. Orange glow against dark walls. Warmth gathered close to the stove. Everything beyond the door belonged to the wind. And the silence. Lela Nantan sat near the fire. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes stayed on the window. Outside, the stallion shifted near the fence. Hoof knocking wood. Clack. Clack. Caleb sat across the table cleaning his rifle. Cloth sliding slowly along the barrel. Metal glinting in the firelight. The room held small sounds. The fire cracking. The slow brush of cloth on steel. The kettle whispering above the flame. Peaceful sounds. But no one believed the peace. Outside the wind lifted. Grass bending across the dark pasture. Then the stallion snorted sharply. Caleb froze. The cloth stopped moving. Silence dropped over the room. Even the fire seemed to quiet. Then it came. Distant. Soft. Clink. Clink. Horse tack. Moving slow across the valley. Lela closed her eyes. They came back. Caleb stood. The chair legs scraped the floor. He stepped onto the porch. Cold air struck his face. Hard. Lantern light swung from the porch beam. Its glow barely reached the yard. Beyond the fence the land stretched black and endless. But small shapes moved along the ridge. 5. No. More. Lanterns flickered faint against the night. Like drifting stars. Caleb's jaw tightened. The riders stopped just beyond the fence. Hooves shifting. Leather creaking. Victor Hale's voice carried easily across the dark. Evening, Turner. Caleb stayed silent. Hale nudged his horse forward. Lantern light brushed the man's coat. Black. Clean. Unbothered by dust or cold. Thought about my offer? Hale asked. The stallion stomped again. Clack. Caleb leaned against the porch rail. You rode a long way to hear the same answer. Hale smiled faintly. Men often change their minds after sunset. The other rider spread along the fence. Boots shifting in stirrups. Rifle barrels catching faint lantern light. Cold metal glimmering in the dark. Behind Caleb the house door creaked open. Lela stepped onto the porch. The wind pulled her hair loose around her shoulders. Hale noticed immediately. Well now, he said softly. You're still here. Lela's voice stayed calm. This horse was my brother's. Hale laughed quietly. Short. Cruel. Your brother is likely bones in the dirt. The stallion jerked against the rail. Leather strained. Caleb stepped down from the porch. Slow. Measured. Boots pressing dirt. You said your piece. Ride home. Hale's smile faded. Instead he reached into his saddlebag. Paper rustled. He unfolded a document beneath the lantern. The parchment snapped softly in the wind. Legal claim, he said. My ranch owns this entire basin. He held the paper toward Caleb. You're trespassing on my land. Caleb did not move. The wind tugged the edges of the paper. The fire inside the house popped softly behind them. Warmth against the cold night. Hale lowered the paper slowly. Sell the horse. Leave the ranch. You walk away breathing. Silence stretched across the yard. The stallion's breathing filled the space. Heavy. Restless. Lela stepped forward beside Caleb. That horse carries the mark of my people. Hale turned his head slowly toward her. Eyes narrowing. You Apache always talk about marks. His hand lifted slightly. One of the riders moved. Boot scraping against stirrup. The man leaned from the saddle and reached toward Lela. Maybe we take the horse, the rider muttered. And the woman too. The words had barely left his mouth when Caleb moved. Fast. His hand caught the rider's wrist mid-air. Hard. The man gasped. Caleb twisted once. Bone cracked sharp in the night air. The rider screamed. Horses reared. Lanterns swung wildly. Shadows jumping across the pasture. Hale's hand dropped instantly to his revolver. But Caleb already stood between the rider and Lela. Still. silent. The injured man fell from his saddle. He hit the ground hard. Dust rising around him. Groans spilling from his throat. The valley felt quiet again, except for the injured rider's ragged breathing. Victor Hale studied Caleb carefully. Long. Cold. Then slowly, he removed his hand from the revolver. His voice returned calm. But the softness was gone. "You just made this expensive." Caleb didn't answer. Wind swept across the grass. Cold air cutting through the yard. Hale looked once more at the stallion. Then at Lela. His voice dropped lower. "Tomorrow I return with men who don't ask questions." He turned his horse. The other riders gathered the injured man. Boots dragging across the dirt. Leather creaking. Lanterns bobbing as they rode away. Hooves fading slowly toward the ridge. Clink. Clink. The metal sound disappeared into the night. Caleb stood in the yard long after the darkness swallowed them. Behind him the house glowed warm. But the valley had changed. War had just stepped onto the land. And tomorrow it would ride straight for the ranch. Dawn came hard and cold. Wind rolled down from the western ridge. The pasture grass bent low beneath it. Caleb Turner stood in the yard beside the stallion. The horse shifted restlessly. Hooves striking the rail. Clack. Clack. The sound echoed across the quiet valley. Lela Nantan stepped from the house. A rifle rested in her hands. The fire behind her glowed warm through the open doorway. Orange light against the cold morning air. "You did not sleep," she said. Caleb shook his head. "Men like Hale ride early." The stallion snorted. Breath rising white into the dawn. Far across the ridge a thin line of dust appeared. Low. Spreading wide. Lela saw it too. "They come." Caleb mounted the stallion. Leather creaked beneath his weight. He studied the horizon. The dust line grew thicker. More riders than yesterday. Many more. The wind carried the faint rhythm of hooves. Distant thunder. Caleb turned toward the barn. "Bring the lantern oil." Lela did not question him. She moved quickly. Boots striking the porch boards. Inside the barn Caleb checked the saddle straps again. His rifle rested across the horn. The stallion stamped once. Restless. Caleb leaned close to the horse's ear. "Easy, boy." Outside the wind lifted dust across the pasture. The riders were closer now. Shapes forming within the cloud. 10 men. Maybe more. Lanterns swung from saddles though the sun had begun to rise. Metal glinted in the light. Cold steel. Lela returned with the oil can. She set it beside the barn wall. "What do you plan?" Caleb looked toward the riders. "Make the ground speak first." He poured oil along the dry grass near the outer fence. Thin dark lines soaking into the soil. The wind shifted. Cold air across the valley. Lela watched the approaching riders. "They will not stop." "I know." He handed her the rifle. "Stay near the barn." "And you?" Caleb swung back onto the stallion. "I meet them halfway." The horse lunged forward. Hooves pounding the pasture. Dust rising behind them. The riders slowed when Caleb approached. Victor Hale rode at their center. Black coat. Cold eyes. His smile returned when he saw Caleb. "Morning, Turner." The riders spread wide. Rifles resting across their saddles. The valley filled with the quiet noise of horses breathing. Leather creaking. Metal tapping softly. Hale nodded toward the ranch. "Last chance." "Step aside." Caleb remained still in the saddle. The stallion's muscles trembled beneath him. "You were told yesterday," Caleb said quietly. "That horse stays." Hale sighed. A tired sound. Then he lifted one hand. The riders moved forward. Slow. Deliberate. Boots shifting in stirrups. Rifles rising. The stallion snorted. Caleb turned the horse sharply. They rode back toward the ranch. The riders followed. Hooves thundered now. The ground shook beneath them. When the first rider crossed the oil-soaked grass, Caleb struck the match. The flame flared bright against the wind. He tossed it behind him. Fire leapt instantly along the dry line. Whoosh! Orange flames raced across the ground. Heat exploded through the pasture. Horses screamed. The riders pulled hard on their reins. Smoke rolled upward. Black. Thick. Hale shouted orders above the roar. The stallion charged through the smoke toward the barn. Hooves pounding. Caleb swung from the saddle beside the fence. Lela stood waiting. Rifle ready. The first rider burst through the smoke. She fired once. The shot cracked across the valley. The rider fell. His horse bolted into the flames. Gunfire erupted. Sharp thunder splitting the morning air. Caleb fired from behind the fence rail. One shot. Another. Wood splintered as bullets struck the barn wall. The stallion kicked wildly in the corral. The fire line roared across the grass. Smoke swallowed the rider's advance. But Hale pushed forward. He rode straight through the burning edge. His coat streaked with ash. Revolver raised. The shot struck the porch rail beside Caleb. Wood exploded. Caleb dropped behind the fence. Dust filled his mouth. Lela fired again. Another rider tumbled from the saddle. The valley rang with gunfire. Noise everywhere. Smoke. Flames. Screaming horses. The stallion reared against the corral gate. Wood cracked beneath the pressure. Caleb rose and fired again. Hale's horse stumbled as the bullet struck its leg. The animal collapsed. Hale rolled free and rose with the revolver still in his hand. For a moment the smoke thinned between them. Two men facing each other across the yard. Hale's voice cut through the chaos. "You should have taken the money." Caleb's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it. His hand moved slowly to the revolver at his belt. The wind shifted suddenly. Smoke cleared. Sunlight spilled across the burning grass. The valley roared with fire behind them. Hale fired first. The bullet tore through Caleb's sleeve. Heat burned along his arm. Caleb answered with a single shot. The revolver thundered. Hale staggered. The gun fell from his hand. Silence followed. Not complete silence. The fire still roared. Wood cracked in the flames. But the riders who remained turned their horses away. Fear replacing greed. Hooves thundered toward the ridge. Dust swallowed them. Hale collapsed in the dirt. Smoke drifted slowly across the valley. Caleb stood breathing hard. The stallion stomped the corral gate open. The horse stepped forward beside him. Lela lowered the rifle. The fire began to die. And the valley slowly returned to silence. Smoke drifted slowly across the pasture. Thin gray ribbons twisting through the morning light. The fire had burned itself down. Black earth. Charred grass. The valley smelled of ash and gunpowder. Caleb Turner stood near the broken fence. His sleeve hung torn where Hale's bullet had passed. Blood darkened the cloth. Warm. Sticky. But he ignored it. The stallion paced beside him. Hoof striking dirt. Clack. Clack. The horse kept watching the ridge. Waiting for riders that never returned. Behind them the barn door creaked softly. Lela Nantan stepped into the yard. The rifle rested low in her hands. The wind carried the last whisper of smoke across her face. "Is he dead?" she asked. Caleb looked down. Victor Hale lay near the burned grass. Still. His black coat stained with dust and ash. Caleb walked closer. Boots crunching through the charred ground. The air felt strangely quiet now. The noise of battle gone. Only wind. Only breath. Hale stirred slightly. A faint groan escaped him. Not dead. Not yet. Caleb knelt beside him. The revolver lay just beyond Hale's reach. Caleb kicked it farther away. Metal scraping the dirt. Lela approached slowly. The stallion followed behind them. Hooves pressing softly through ash. Hale's eyes opened. Clouded. Weak. But still sharp. He looked up at Caleb. "You should have sold the horse." His voice rasped like dry leaves. Caleb said nothing. The wind pushed smoke across the field. The stallion snorted once. Lela stepped closer. Her eyes moved across Hale's coat. Across the saddlebag still strapped to his fallen horse. Something caught her attention. A strip of leather tied near the saddle horn. Old leather. Worn smooth by years of riding. Her breath caught. "That bag," she said quietly. Caleb followed her gaze. The stallion lowered its head toward the fallen horse. The leather pouch hung beneath the main strap. Hidden. Carefully placed. Lela moved slowly. She untied the pouch with steady hands. The leather creaked softly as she opened it. Inside rested folded papers. Wrapped in oilcloth. Dry despite the fire and smoke. Lela's fingers trembled slightly. She unfolded the cloth. A map slipped free. Old parchment. Edges worn. Symbols drawn across the valley. Creeks. Hills. Grazing trails. And at the bottom. Signatures. Ink faded but clear. Government seal. Apache names. Lela stared at the document. "This is the treaty map," she whispered. Caleb leaned closer. The paper rustled in the wind. Her finger traced the boundary line. The valley. The ranch. The entire basin. Marked as Apache land. Protected. Signed. Stolen. Hale coughed weakly beside them. His breath rattled. "You found it," he said hoarsely. Lela turned toward him. Her voice cold now. "You burned our camp to steal this." Hale laughed softly. Pain twisted the sound. "That map makes this valley worthless to men like me." His eyes moved toward Caleb. "But if no one knows it exists?" His voice faded. The wind carried the rest away. Lela folded the map carefully. The oilcloth wrapped around it once more. Her hand steadied. "My brother hid this on the horse." Caleb nodded slowly. "So Hale chased the horse." "Because the horse carried proof." The stallion stamped the ground. Clack. Clack. As if agreeing. The wind shifted across the valley. Cool now. Gentle. The fire's heat fading. But the quiet still carried tension. Caleb scanned the ridge again. The riders had fled. But men like Hale always had friends. Enemies too. Lela noticed his watchful eyes. They may return. Maybe. Caleb took the pouch. He placed it carefully inside his coat. The leather brushed softly against the fabric. A quiet sound. But heavy with meaning. The stallion lowered its head toward Lela. She rested her hand along the scarred brand. "My father marked him strong," she whispered. The horse breathed slowly. Warm breath against her palm. Behind them Hale's breathing grew weaker. Fainter. The wind brushed across the burned field. The ranch house door creaked open in the distance. Warm firelight spilled faintly into the yard. A promise of shelter. A promise of peace. Hale spoke once more. Barely a whisper. "You think that map saves you?" Caleb looked down at him. "No." Hale smiled faintly. Crooked. Then his eyes closed. The wind carried the last of his breath across the valley. Silence returned. Deep. True. The stallion stepped forward beside Caleb and Lela. 3 figures standing in the quiet morning. The valley belonged to them now. But the truth inside Caleb's coat would change more than just this ranch. And somewhere far beyond the hills, that truth would begin to travel. Spring rain came 3 weeks after the fire. Soft, steady drops tapped the ranch roof in slow rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Caleb Turner stood beneath the porch rail watching the pasture drink the water. Green shoots covered the burned ground now. Fresh grass pushing through black soil. Life returning. The stallion grazed quietly near the fence, its scarred shoulder dark beneath the wet coat. The horse moved slowly, peaceful. But every few moments its hoof struck the rail. Clack, clack. The sound carried through the rain. Lela Nantan stepped onto the porch beside Caleb. She carried a folded blanket in her arms. Warm wool, dry against the damp morning. "The grass grows strong," she said. Caleb nodded. "Fire clears old roots." Wind moved across the valley. Gentle now. No dust. No smoke. Just rain and soft green hills. The ranch looked different. Fences repaired. The barn roof newly mended. Smoke curling from the chimney. Inside the house a fire burned warm against the damp air. The door creaked open behind them. A small boy stepped onto the porch. Barefoot. Sleep still in his eyes. He held a wooden toy horse carved from old fence wood. Lela rested a hand on his shoulder. "This is Thomas," she said softly. "My brother's son." Caleb looked down at the boy. The child studied the stallion across the pasture. "Is that the horse?" he asked. Lela smiled faintly. "Yes." The stallion lifted its head as if hearing the boy's voice. Rain ran down its mane. The horse walked slowly toward the fence, hooves pressing softly through wet grass. Clack, clack. The boy's eyes widened. "It sounds like drums." Caleb leaned on the porch rail. "Good drums," he said. The child stepped into the yard. Rain soaked the dust around his feet. He walked carefully toward the horse. The stallion lowered its head, breathing warm against the boy's hair. For a moment the valley held complete silence. Only rain. Only breath. Lela watched them. Her voice quiet. "My brother hid the treaty map so someone would one day find it." Caleb nodded. The memory of the burned field still lived in the back of his mind. Smoke. Gunfire. The crack of Hale's revolver. The wind shifted suddenly. For a brief moment Caleb's eyes lifted toward the ridge. Old habit. Always watching. The hills remained empty. Green. Peaceful. No dust. No riders. He relaxed again. "Word reached the agency yesterday," Lela continued. "They will come soon." "For the map?" "For the truth." Inside the house the fire popped softly. Warm. Safe. The rain slowed. Clouds parted slowly across the sky. Sunlight spilled across the valley. Gold light sliding across wet grass. The stallion stepped back from the fence. The boy laughed softly. Small hands clapped once. The horse answered with a gentle snort. Caleb stepped down from the porch, boots pressing into soft earth. He walked toward the fence where the stallion waited. The animal stood calm beneath the warming sun. Caleb rested his hand along the scarred brand. The mark felt warm now. Not burned. Not angry. Just old. "You carried truth a long way," Caleb murmured. The stallion breathed steadily. Behind him the boy ran across the yard laughing. Rainwater splashing beneath his feet. Lela followed slowly, her footsteps quiet against the wet ground. "You kept the ranch alive," she said. Caleb shrugged. "Ranch kept me alive." She looked across the pasture. The valley spread wide under the brightening sky. "My people once called this valley the Quiet Drum." Caleb glanced toward the stallion. "Because of the horse?" She nodded. "Because of the sound." At that moment the stallion stamped the ground again. Clack. Clack. The sound echoed gently across the open grass. Not sharp. Not angry. Just steady. Like a slow heartbeat. The boy laughed again. He placed his wooden toy horse beside the fence rail. The carved hooves tapped softly against the wood. Tap. 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 Caleb watched the child. Watched the valley. The fire inside the house crackled warmly through the open window. The smell of wood smoke drifted into the spring air. No gunfire. No riders. Just quiet life returning. Lela stood beside him. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. The stallion walked along the fence. Hooves tapping the rail once more. Clack. Clack. The sound rolled across the green valley. Not a warning now. Not a call to war. Just the peaceful drum of a horse that had finally come home. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again, hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past, and your heart pointed west.